Cool. All right. So I'm going to shut my trap here and introduce our speaker, who we're super excited to have. And we want to thank her in advance for getting on board with us and trying out this, trying this out virtually. And also, Erin, thank you so much for waking up so early. Erin is visiting us from the West Coast today, and she looks great. I wanted to say that earlier. You look great anyway, and also especially because I know it's very early there. And um, just thank you. So Erin is a professor, an author, and she's also the founder and executive director of Dignity Rights International, which is a Philadelphia-based nonprofit organization dedicated to advancing and protecting human dignity and the dignity rights of vulnerable people throughout the world through education, advocacy, and litigation. So I'm going to stop there because I know she has lots to share with us, and I'm going to hand it to Erin. Take it away.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much. Yeah, this is really a thrill to sort of be here with everybody. I have to admit, this was not the way I was imagining this talk would go when Laura first invited me to do this, but I'm really delighted that the wonderful folks at Creative Mornings have lived up to their names and figured out a creative way to stay the course. So thank you to Michelle and Laura and Justin and everyone else on the Creative Mornings team. And I gotta say, it's really wonderful to be connected with everybody here this morning, this afternoon, this evening, wherever you are in the world, from England and from Romania and from all over the place, near and far, and to share breakfast with you and some wonderful quotes. So I'm really looking forward to sharing sunshine and coming alive. That's what I've learned about this morning from reading the quotes. And also, I just noticed that a lot of the quotes were about sort of, know yourself, know what makes you come alive, and those kinds of things. So that's actually a lot of what we're going to be talking about this morning. So as you heard, the theme of the month is purpose, which somehow does seem oddly appropriate for this time when a lot of us are asking not only what is going on and how to deal with it, but also why. So what I want to talk to you this morning about is the hidden power of purpose and my work in law and thinking about purpose in that context. So I'm not sure that we think enough about purpose. And Michelle asked you to run through the raising hands thing. And part of that was because I wanted to ask you to raise your hand if you think about purpose often, if this is something that sort of grabs you. So for some, yeah, and some no. It's one of those things that's sort of hidden in plain sight, right? In some ways, it's, I think, the most important thing. It's the engine that drives, well, pretty much everything else. I think that understanding purpose can make hard things easier and can make impossible things doable sometimes. So I'll give you an example. A couple of years ago, my son, who's now almost 25, but a couple of years ago, he rode his bike across country all by himself on his own. And I asked him once how he did it. Like, how did he, did he get lonely? Didn't he ever get discouraged when he was out there sort of in the middle of the country when it was, too far to turn back, but he wasn't close enough to his goal yet? And what he said was, yeah, of course I got lonely sometimes and I, got discouraged sometimes, but then I remembered why I was doing this and I got through those moments. It doesn't even really matter what the purpose is, as long as you do have a purpose and you know what it is. So in fact, if you think about anything difficult that you've done, what keeps you going usually is remembering your purpose. Why do you work much harder than you want to sometimes? Why do you give up, well, pretty much everything for your child? Why are we all staying home and talking to each other by video? To make hard things doable, we find a very good reason for doing them. Something that's larger than ourselves, whether it's public health or the need for income or love or whatever it is. Something that's larger than us, but also something that's inside us at the same time. Everyone has their own personal goals, what motivates them or what makes them come alive. The opposite is also true. The hardest things in life, I think, are hard because we've lost our purpose. Why bother? Why am I doing this? It's not the how or the what that's hard, but the why. That's the engine. And when it stalls, we can't really move forward. I'm a law professor. I'm not a social psychologist. I'm not a philosopher. So I think about this in terms of law. I often start my classes at the very beginning of the semester. My first question often is, about purpose. Why do we have a constitution? Why do we protect free speech? I teach a class called Administrative Law. If you're a lawyer, you probably remember administrative law, maybe fondly, maybe not so much. If you're not a lawyer, you've maybe never heard of it. It sounds really boring, but it's not. It's actually a class about how the government works, which, is kind of important sometimes. And I often start my class with the same question that we're talking about now. Why do we have government? What's the purpose of having a government? Sometimes people say to create order, or so that people can be free, or to avoid anarchy. My favorite answer ever, and I've been asking this question to a lot of students over many years, my favorite answer ever was somebody just jutted her hand up just as soon as I asked the question, and she said, to make people happy. That's the purpose of government. She was an Iraqi war vet who came to law school to be in the JAG Corps. What she really wanted to do was to make the world a better place. She was going to work for the United States Army to make people happy, right? So everybody does it in their own way. Purpose functions in law pretty much the same way it functions in life. It motivates us to do things that we don't otherwise want to do. Laws, by definition, restrict liberty. If we didn't have laws, we could do whatever we wanted, right? But laws say you have to pay taxes, or you have to wear a seatbelt, or you have to stay at home and you can't go outside. So my question sort of for this presentation is, what's the purpose of law? What's the purpose of a system of laws? And I want to propose to you the idea that the purpose of law, indeed the purpose of government, is to protect and to promote human dignity. We can't live in a world where everybody has unlimited freedom, where everybody can do whatever they want to do. But most of us want to live in a world where everybody has unlimited dignity. So what is dignity? I think of dignity as having 4 essential qualities. It's the idea that every person has inherent worth just by virtue of being born, and that every person's worth is equal to everyone else's. So it's intrinsic, it's inherent, it's equal, and it's human worth. It's as if each of us is born with a valuable coin that we hold on to throughout our lives and can never lose, that always retains some intrinsic value. And it applies universally to every person who has ever been born and whoever will be born. But it's not just an internal fire. It's the connection we have with each other, whether in person or, as in this case, virtually. Dignity allows us to be individuals, but to live in community with others. It's what I've called the dignity of belonging. In South Africa, it's called Ubuntu. In Latin America, it's called convivencia. In France, they think of it as fraternité. It has the same meaning in lots of different, or a similar meaning in lots of different cultures throughout the world. Dignity has been recognized as a quality of humanity for centuries, but only in the mid-20th century did it become the lodestar, the North Star, the guiding purpose of law. This is the phoenix that grew out of the ashes of World War II. And this is what defines our sense of human rights today. So I'm going to give you some examples of how dignity is recognized as the foundation of law. I just want you to see sort of the language that's used in these texts. The first place we see it is in the Charter of the United Nations. So the United Nations was founded literally at the dawn of the post-war era. In April 1945, nations from around the world came together and said, all right, we've got to stop these wars. We've got to come together as a united body. And they came together for 2 main purposes. One was, as they said, to end the scourge of war. But the second one was to reaffirm faith in the dignity and worth of the human person. Right? These 2 things are integrally connected. One of the very first things that the United Nations did was create a Commission for Human Rights, and they charged that Commission for Human Rights with the task of developing an international Bill of Rights. And the result of that was the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was adopted by the United Nations General Assembly in 1948. And you see here the sort of the foundational place of dignity in that document. It starts with words from the preamble that say, whereas recognition of the inherent dignity and the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. And then there's a few more sort of articles of preamble, and then it starts with 30 articles that identify the rights that people have. And the very first one of those is this one. All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. The importance of this can't be overstated. It's changed the way we think about rights and even about humanity. It's changed what's acceptable and what needs to be eradicated the world over. And what happens next is really interesting. This idea of dignity that starts in law at this international level flowed out of these foundational international documents and into the constitutions of more than 160 countries. Now that's remarkable. There's 194 or something countries that are member states of the United Nations. 160 countries of those 194 have constitutions that recognize human dignity. So I just want to sort of walk you through a few of these texts. This isn't going to get too legal, I promise, but I really just want you to see sort of the way dignity is talked about and the way purpose is talked about in these texts. So the first one is from Kenya, which actually identifies the theme of this month's Creative Mornings, the purpose of recognizing and protecting human rights and fundamental freedoms is to preserve the dignity of individuals and communities, and to promote social justice and the realization and the potential of all human beings. The next one is from Peru. And again, we get this notion of purpose. The defense of the human person and respect for his dignity are the supreme purpose of the society and the state. Why do we have a state? Why do people come together in society? For the defense of the human person and respect for their dignity. Another important sort of example of this is from Germany. Human dignity shall be inviolable. To respect and protect it shall be the duty of all state authority. And this is just an important idea that dignity is this sort of foundational value and it's inviolable. You can't sort of balance, oh, let's threaten dignity just a little bit, it'll be okay. The idea is that it remains inviolable. The Constitution of the United States has this language about dignity. No, that's not a mistake. It actually doesn't mention the word dignity at all, but it is in our laws. And last August, the American Bar Association adopted a resolution that affirmed the place of human dignity as the basis of law in America and really throughout the world. It affirms that human dignity, the inherent, equal, and inalienable worth of every person, is foundational to a just rule of law. And then further resolved to urge governments all around the world, not just in the United States, to ensure that dignity rights be reflected in the exercise of legislative, executive, and judicial functions. So you can see it here in the fabric of our laws and in the constitutions of most states as a really sort of foundational idea that really guides the purpose of the nation. From these constitutional texts, it flowed then into courts where it can be enforced, where it can be applied in the context of people's lives. So I'm going to walk you through just a few cases that show how courts around the world have thought about this concept of dignity. The first case is from Mexico, and it's a case about the rights of same-sex couples to adopt children. The dignity of man is inherent to his essence, to his being. Dignity is absolutely fundamental and the basis and condition of all other rights, the right to be recognized as a human person. The next case is from the United States, actually, which says that these matters involving family and choice and this was a case about abortion rights, involving the most intimate and personal choices a person can make in a lifetime. Choices that are central to human dignity and autonomy are central to the liberty protected under the 14th Amendment. I'm going to go through some of these slides sort of quickly just because there's a lot of language here. But in the next slide, you'll see two cases, one from India and one from Germany, but both talking about the same thing. And I like sort of the juxtaposition of both of these cases because India and Germany have very, very different sort of economic challenges, if you will. But they both end up saying the same thing, that the right to life includes the right to live with dignity. That's what having a right to life is. and that people need to have the bare necessities of life, including nutrition, clothing, shelter, over the head, facilities for reading and writing and expressing oneself, and the ability to freely move about and mix and commingle with other human beings. And in Germany, the same kind of thing. They're figuring out what level to set pensions at, and it has to provide a subsistence minimum, as they call, that allows people to have food, clothing, household goods, housing, heating, hygiene, etc., and a minimum participation in social and cultural life. That allow people to live as people, existing in social relations. In the next case, a recent case from what is actually a very progressive court, the High Court of Lahore in Pakistan, which recognized in a case about food redistribution that it was important when you had excess food in some places to redistribute it so that everybody had access to food, and that had the advantage of ensuring the dignity of the person. We also see it recently or increasingly in cases about the environment. In a case from Nepal, it cannot be imagined to live with dignity in a polluted environment. And even more recently, in a case from the High Court of Ireland, recognizing a right to an environment that is consistent with human dignity and establishing that as a constitutional right. We see it a lot in criminal justice contexts also. In one case from Germany, in which they invalidated the sentence of life without parole, that if you sentence someone to life, you have to give them a meaningful opportunity for parole. This is a country like all of Europe that has already, like most of the world, that has already abolished the death penalty. So the next worst punishment was imprisonment without parole, and they abolished that too, saying that it would be incompatible with human dignity if the convicted person had to abandon all hope of ever regaining liberty. The idea of the association of dignity with hope. But in the United States also, the court has been saying since the 1950s that the basic concept underlying the Eighth Amendment against cruel and unusual punishment is nothing less than the dignity of man. And then the last example I'll give you is free speech. The constitutional right of free expression, and this is a US case, obviously, from California. The constitutional right of free expression is powerful medicine in a society as diverse and populous as ours. It is designed to put the decision. So what's the purpose of the constitutional right of free expression? It's designed to put the decision as to what views shall be voiced largely into the hands of each of us, in the belief that no other approach would comport with the premise of individual dignity and choice upon which our political system rests. Our political system rests on the premise of individual dignity and choice, and that's why we protect these rights like the Eighth Amendment, the First Amendment, etc. So it's reflected as the basis of law. People have dignity and we start by reaffirming our faith and dignity, and then there are rights that flow from that. As Hannah Arendt said, it's the right to have rights. But it's also the very purpose of law, of the state, and of society. In many states, the government has the obligation to ensure that every person can live with dignity, has sufficient food and clothing and shelter and health care so that they can live with dignity. And what's the purpose of that? The purpose of that is to ensure that each of us can fully develop our personalities, to define ourselves as we want, to know what makes you come alive. Not to do everything we want, but to make of our lives what we want, to have some agency over the course of our lives. So courts that are paying attention to human dignity are doing a few different things. First, they're focusing on the human experience. You would think that would be obvious, but it's not. Courts don't always do that, and in some instances, they don't do that at all. But here, they're thinking about what it means to be the vulnerable person who is discriminated against, who doesn't have a place to live, who's breathing in toxic fumes from burning trash. They're thinking about what it means to be the person who needs protection from the state because they're in custody or not able to take care of themselves, the person who wants to speak their mind or practice their religion, even if no one else agrees with them. And they're thinking about what people need. What does a person need to live with dignity? How much food, water, or health care? What's the minimum wage a person can live on? So throughout these cases, courts are defining what people need, really what it means to be human in the 21st century. And they're using their powers to ensure that people get what they need in order to live with dignity, to live in society with others. Clean up the river to the point where people can live with dignity on its banks. Provide enough health care to ensure that a sick person can go out in public and work and be with friends. Make sure that each person has a pension that allows them to live with dignity. Protect reproductive rights so that women can participate in the social and economic life of the nation, as the court said in that case. Make sure that prisoners and defendants are treated with dignity, even if their liberty is compromised. So they're thinking about the rights that people can claim against the government, which means they're thinking about the obligations that states have towards people. What must states ensure, allow, or provide, or guarantee? And that, of course, brings us back to our initial question. What's the very purpose of the state, of government, of laws? What is the state there to do? And how can we think about these questions without thinking about purpose? And if we think about purpose, we think about human dignity. Now, dignity doesn't answer all the questions, but it can point us in the right direction. It can keep us focused on the goal. So for those of us who are doing human rights work, keeping this purpose in mind focuses us on what's really at stake, the right of every person everywhere to live with dignity. And remembering this purpose can help make the daunting task of trying to protect human rights doable. I want to close by telling you about some work that my colleague Jim May, who's here in the audience, thank you, and I have been doing at Dignity Rights International to advance human dignity in a rather neglected corner of the world, the slums of Port-au-Prince, Haiti, where some really remarkable people live. So we've been working with a community center there in Haiti for a few years. And you'll see some pictures of that center. This is just sort of one of the walls outside where a bunch of people are gathered. And I'm just going to show you a few pictures of what it looks like sort of inside and then outside this community center. The center itself is this really remarkable place. There's a big field, as you see or sort of a sports terrain, as you see on the slide on the left. And there's a big classroom in the middle where they do a lot of sort of group work and presentations and do a lot of homework help and tutoring and things like that. A kitchen where they feed about 200 people each day, provide them with a warm meal. There's also a wall sort of on the outside they call the Wall of Dreams, where people write what their ambitions are. So people sort of write their names, and then they say, I want to be a doctor by the year 2027, or I want to be an engineer, I want to be a lawyer, where they sort of identify what their future goals are, what their purpose is. It also has a community garden, which is just a remarkable place. It's the largest urban garden in Haiti, and they grow all kinds of things there, and sort of, kids learn how to nurture the land. But if you walk right outside the community garden, this gorgeous place, this is what you see. You see these canals, and you see people walking along the canals, doing their things, going to work, going to school. But the canals are just filled with trash. And I'm just going to show you a few different pictures of what it looks like immediately outside this beautiful little community center. The canals are so filled with trash that usually you can actually just walk across the water on the trash. And there's no way to get rid of it except literally by burning it. It obviously attracts all kinds of animals and things. This is a young man who's from the community center who is taking us on a tour and sort of showing us just how the trash has been there and is just filling up all the empty space in that area. It's a problem that has been developing over more than 10 years of just abject neglect in that community. So we've been working with some of the people there, and in March of this year, immediately before sort of COVID really hit and we all stopped traveling and moving around, the Inter-American Human Rights Commission was holding its 175th session in Port-au-Prince. And we brought a group of people from the community center to the hearings where the Inter-American Human Rights Commission was holding its hearings. And we had a meeting with one of the commissioners there so that she could hear so that she could hear the stories of how people live in these conditions. And she spent over an hour listening to the kids, listening to their stories, listening to how they sort of get through the trash, what effects it has on their health, on their mental health, on their sense of dignity. We don't know yet what's going to come of this. We're trying to follow up, but of course, like everything else, the pandemic is making things much more difficult these days, especially for people in places like Haiti. But we're hoping that the opportunity that these kids had to be heard, to be truly listened to, and to some degree to be sort of understood, to be seen, that itself was an act of dignity. So I'll close with that. And again, thank you so much for coming, for taking time out of your day. I know another Zoom meeting is not what a lot of you wanted to do, so I'm just really thrilled to have you here. And I'd love to continue the conversation. So thank you very much.